Nightingale is well known to us as one of our own U3a members. He's recently retired as a consultant neurologist at our local hospital, but today he is here to talk to us about humanism. Now, this is a subject of interest for anyone who has thought hard about life, death and everything, and who hasn't. But the unexamined life is not worth living, so said Socrates. So here, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. Simon Nightingale.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honour to be invited here. Now, I'm a humanist. What does that mean? Well, the usual soundbite we use to describe a humanist, we say humanists believe that you can lead a good life and be a good person without religion. Now, I know some of you are from philosophy groups, and you're immediately thinking, I'm not so sure about this, because you say you believe this, but what evidence do you have? And what is a good life? What does it mean to lead a good life? And how can you be a good person unless you have religious instruction? And you say you live without religion, but isn't humanism just another religion? And even if that's the case, what do humanists actually do? And I'm going to answer all these questions, at least at a basic level. So firstly, what sort of thing is humanism? Well, nowadays we talk about belief systems as life stances or worldviews, and they link beliefs and values, and some may be religious and some may not be religious. There is actually a sort of grey area in the middle. For example, some forms of Buddhism, secular Quakers, Sea of Faith Anglicans are probably moving a little bit away from religious to non-religious. Now, of course, it all depends on how you define religion. If you define it too narrowly, it's unhelpful because it would exclude many things that we think are obviously religions. If you have too wide a definition, it'll start including things like the WI or U3a or Shrewsbury football supporters, although I think that may be a religion because they believe in miracles. Now, there's probably no single feature that defines all religion. A more suitable definition would be based on a sort of Wittgenstein family resemblance. So a religion will usually include some of the following. And if you believe in polytheism, there are literally hundreds of thousands of gods. Heaven, hell, limbo, purgatory, Bible, Torah, Quran. These are rules and doctrine that are figuratively or sometimes literally carved in stone. This is a prescribed pattern of worship. Founding figurehead Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, usually men, and popes, imams, priests, usually men. Now, although gods can be female, there are far more male gods, and the founding figures and leaders are almost men, and some women have suggested that religions are on the whole run by men for men. Now, if you don't believe any of that, and particularly if you don't believe in God, you are an atheist. That's what it means. Nothing more, nothing less. It does not make you a humanist. There was a time in my life between losing my Christian faith and becoming a humanist several decades later when I did call myself an atheist. Everybody had long hair in the 60s. I haven't changed. Still got the Africa. And I was an atheist, and I went around telling people with faith that everything they thought was important and meaningful in their lives was a load of rubbish. And, you know, they were very sweet. They said, yes, Simon, of course. And to their great credit, we remained friends. And I'm very embarrassed when I look back on that. Like many people who came to atheism from religion, I was a bit angry. But it wasn't until I went to a humanist funeral about 15 years ago that I decided to find out about humanism. And I came to realize that, of course, we shouldn't be defined by what we don't believe, but by what we do believe. I don't believe in Father Christmas, but I don't want to be known as an A Father Christmasist. So I became I became a humanist because it's a life stance that has a range of beliefs and values that are positive, not just atheistic. And my attitude to religion changed. Of course, I'm concerned about the downsides of religion, and most religious people are concerned about the downsides of religion, particularly the downsides of other people's religions. It's always easier to see the errors of others. But I came to recognize that those with faith saw their religion as making them happier and better people, and they saw the same in their families and in their communities. But I felt that humanists could achieve the same without religion. It's not easy, but we try hard because it's important. Now, before I tell you, so this is me as a humanist. Before I tell you what our positive beliefs are, I'd like to show you some statistics explaining that living without religion is actually not all that uncommon. There have been a number of surveys over the last few decades which produced broadly similar results. But how religious we are as a nation depends entirely on how the question is phrased. And broadly speaking, there are several ways of measuring and assessing religiosity. Now, loose cultural affiliation, in this sense, I'm a Christian in a sort of John Betjeman way. I love cathedrals and churches and church music. I love Christmas. But that's not religion in the normal sense. I don't belong to religion. I don't call myself religious. Nor do I believe in, for example, resurrection, virgin birth, miracles, let alone the existence of God. And nor do I attend a church or any other place of worship. Now, sociologists, quite rightly, discard the first as having nothing to do with religion. And they call the others belonging, believing, and behaving. And each of those needs to be taken into account when measuring the religiosity of individuals or a community. Now, I'm going to give you some very basic facts. And if you want, come to me after, I can give you links to all the surveys these come from. But recently, it's been shown that 50% of the UK population say that they live without religion. And that jumps up to almost 70% in school leavers. Of those who call themselves Christian, less than half believe that Jesus was a real person who was crucified, died, came back to life and was the Son of God. That's not 50% of the general population or 50% of those who live without religion, 50% of those who call themselves Christian. And almost all of those who say they live without religion hold basic humanist beliefs, which I will talk about shortly. Okay, so what do we believe? Well, this is going to be very simple and short. The first thing we believe is naturalism. Now, I well remember when I first told my teenage children that I was joining the Humanist Association. And they got a bit confused between humanism and naturalism and naturism. And they were really worried that they were going to be forced to go on nudist family holidays. And, in fact, there's no nudity in humanism, at least not in the Shropshire branch. In philosophy, naturalism is the belief that only natural laws and natural forces operate in the world, as opposed to supernatural or spiritual forces. Now, religions have in common a belief in a hidden realm of existence, a transcendental realm, usually including one or more gods. Even those that have no gods, for example, classical Buddhism and Jainism, believe in a hidden celestial realm to which their followers aspire. Our beliefs, humanist beliefs, are more naturalistic. We deny there's a second level of existence inhabited by ghosts and gods and spirits. We believe that the universe can be explained by natural laws, many of which we've discovered, and the others are at least discoverable in principle. We say that nothing in the universe is out of bounds for science, though some things may be beyond our abilities, certainly at present. We consider claims without evidence to be speculation. We say that claims, religious or not, that aren't supported by sufficient evidence are not credible. We say that the only reality is what we can detect directly or indirectly through our senses. And I say indirectly because we use tools, glasses, microscopes, telescopes, Large Hadron Colliders, and so forth. We believe that the only route towards sure and certain knowledge is through naturalism. I say towards knowledge because naturalistic science has the humility to recognize that it's struggling towards knowledge by constantly challenging and refining its hypotheses. Naturalistic truths are not carved in stone and written in a sacred book. With new evidence, naturalistic truths will change. And it follows that we don't believe in an afterlife. We feel that death is the end and we do not survive it. Again, we differ from religions, almost all religions, who believe there is continued existence after life. Some that there is continued existence before life, before conception. Some believe that you get what you deserve in the afterlife. Our belief is rather more benign. We feel that death is the end. Neuroscience tells us that what we are resides in here, and death is the end of the electrochemical changes that make us who we are and what we are. Okay, so that's naturalism. What about morality? When I talk to faith groups, this is the one thing they all want to know. Where do humanists get their moral values, if not from a holy text? And even if we can work out the right thing to do, why do we bother? Interesting question. So, basic ideas. Some people believe we're born innocent. I don't have any grandchildren. It's absolute disgrace. I chide my children all the time. So some believe we're born innocent and then we get corrupted by the world. Other people that we're born with original sin and need redeeming. Other people say we're just born without any morality, like a blank slate, needing a list of rules to be written on it. And if so, of course, where do those rules come from? Now, as a neuroscientist, I'm interested in cognitive neuropsychology, and I'm well aware that our brain has many built-in systems when we're born, rather like getting a computer that's preloaded with Windows. For example, we have programs that we're born with for speaking language. Which language we speak depends on what we hear. And in the same way, we're all born with basic instinctive moral programs. Now, this is a fascinating area. It's called moral foundation theory. I'm not going to talk a great deal about it today. But for example, we have compassion. And that is something that we all have to greater or lesser degrees, and animals show as well. A sense of fairness and justice, a respect for authority, in-group loyalty, and senses of taboos. So these are innate, although of course modified by our experiences, nature and nurture together. I'm going to give you some simple examples, rather facile examples. They just illustrate what I mean. So, children, when a young child, very young child is kicked, he just kicks back. It's automatic, it's what he does. But later he learns, without being told this, that there is a difference between being kicked on purpose, when you tend to kick back, and being kicked by accident, in which case you don't retaliate. And we actually know which part of the brain confers this function. It's an area called the temporoparietal junction. Also, children have a very keen sense of fairness and unfairness, and one of the first things children say, it's unfair. Okay, now I'm going to do something rather clever. I'm going to push that, and I'm now going to show you a little bit about unfairness in animals. If this works, it'll be great. Nick. Oh, I know what I've got here. I could go back to, let's go back to that. I haven't got what you told me to do. I should go there. What am I doing? It's this one here, isn't it? I should have clicked on this. Let's just go back this way.
So that's the experiment we did. Recently we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece he eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's great. Okay, so all of us, in all societies and all cultures, have moral intelligence. Okay, and this varies from person to person. It's normally distributed. Most people are in the sort of middle somewhere. Some people have very well-developed moral intelligence. Other people have very impaired moral intelligence. For example, psychopaths. And there are various ways of assessing this, and this is an example of one of the sort of tests of moral intelligence. So we'll see how you do. Okay. So the story is that a man breaks into a pharmacy and steals drugs. So how do we think about that? Well, I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? He's broken the law, he's done something bad, he's probably going to get caught, he'll probably go to prison. Even psychopaths see that. Everybody agrees. Okay, so we're going to change the story a little bit. He breaks in because his wife's dying of cancer, and the pharmacist is selling drugs that are only worth £20 for £2,000. And he steals the drug for his wife. He leaves £40 for the medicine, so the pharmacist is not out of pocket, and he mends the window on the way out. Now, it's different, isn't it? I mean, I think we all agree it's different, because we have a gut reaction. Firstly, we have compassion for the husband and particularly his wife. And we have a sense of unfairness here, but also we've got to think a little bit about fairness to the pharmacist. And also got to think a bit about respect for authority. So these are gut reactions we have that are based on moral foundation theory. If you actually analyse the ethics, one way of doing it would be to consider what's the best outcome for everyone. This is called consequentialism. It's the utilitarian calculus that maximises the best outcome for the most people. And those of you who are interested in philosophy will know this started with Bentham and Mill. But the pharmacist has a right not to be robbed. And that is, of course, human rights. And we've got here Locke and Paine. And if you don't want to be robbed, and we don't, we shouldn't rob other people. And that's called mutuality. It's a well-known psychological phenomenon, but also known as the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule has been around for a very long time. Virtually all religions have adopted it. Each religion claims it's their own, but actually the earliest recorded account of it is in the 2nd millennium BC. On the other hand, we should, in a civilized society, obey the social contract, obey the law, even laws that we don't personally like. And that's sort of deontology, and that came from Immanuel Kant. And one important way of looking at this is to consider what is in the mind of the man committing break-in. Was he stealing drugs, addictive drugs, to sell to school children? Or was he doing something that actually he felt was the right thing to do? And this is an area, a very important area of philosophy called virtue ethics, and started with Aristotle and developed more recently by Elizabeth Anscombe. Now, it really doesn't matter what you eventually decide about the right and wrong of the break-in. It doesn't matter if you can come up with names for all these ethical things and the names of the people who come up with them. What's really important is the greater your ability to recognize the complexity, and the better you understand that context might alter the right and wrong, then the greater is your moral sophistication. Psychopaths say, well, he broke in, he's going to get arrested, he's going to go to prison, which is true, probably, but he's not sort of sophisticated, I hope, like all of us. So humanists are saying that biology and culture have created a moral sense, and rather than religion giving us morality, our natural moral instincts, for example the golden rule, have sometimes been adopted by religion. And the point is, you knew all that stuff. You recognized all that stuff in your own reactions. And you didn't study ethics. You haven't got all that from a book. You got it from your own feelings. Now, this is very different from religious beliefs about the origins of morality. That having, for example, no religion means having no morals, that moral law is God's law. As Pope Benedict claimed, atheists and humanists live in a moral vacuum. Okay, I'm not going to say anything about Pope Benedict. Of course, the idea that morals are just God's law actually isn't terribly logical. For is it better to do what you've been told to do in order to please God and maybe have a better chance of going to heaven, or is it better to do good because it's the right thing to do? And this was pointed out over 2,000 years ago by Plato in his dialogue Euthyphro. Okay, so there's Socrates, beard. All philosophers have beards. It's a way of keeping women out of philosophy. And Socrates asks Euthyphro, is an action good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? Now, Euthyphro's dilemma is that if it's good because God says it is, then if God tells us to slaughter our enemies, women and children and all, as he does in parts of the Old Testament, then merciless slaughter is morally good, which isn't very attractive. Alternatively, if God only commands things that are good, then goodness is independent of God, and Socrates suggests that makes God a little redundant. In fact, most people in the general population think they can work out right from wrong without religion. Now, again, I can give you the links to these. I'll give you two questions they asked. The first question is there to choose between these. Human nature by itself gives us an understanding of what is right and wrong, or people need religious teaching in order to understand what is right and wrong. And the large majority of the general population chose the former. The second question, they had to choose between three. What is right and wrong is unchanging and should never be challenged, a sort of fundamentalist view. What is right and wrong depends on the effects on people and the consequences for society and the world, which is the humanist view. And what is right and wrong is basically just a matter of personal preference, which is a sort of moral relativism. And the overwhelming majority of the general population chose the middle one. Okay, I'm going to move on from morality and naturalism and come on to our values. And I've just selected these four. I think one of the most important of them is reason. Rational thinking and careful observation is the only way towards knowledge. in everything in the universe, not just the physical things, but mental phenomena as well. So, as a humanist, I believe the best way to find out about a thing, to find out if it's true, is by studying that thing, by observing and investigating, and necessarily by doing experiments. And that gives me a basic understanding, a hypothesis, if you like. And then I look carefully to see if I can find other things that agree with it. And more importantly, I look for things that disagree with it, will make me change or tweak my hypothesis to make it more likely to approximate the truth. And it's the constant testing and challenging of our ideas that's so important in what we call the scientific method. It's the only way knowledge moves forwards, and we call that discovered truth. So, Aristotle's ideas about the natural world changed in time to those of Galileo, and then Isaac Newton, and then Einstein, and then the wonderful and weird world of quantum mechanics, starting with Max Planck. Now, for humanists, in fact for philosophers in general, there are two main sources of truth, and you might call these axiomatic truth, things like logic and mathematics, and discovered truth, the scientific method. And they have other names. They're called logical and scientific, analytical and synthetic, a priori and a posteriori, necessary and contingent, all meaning slightly different things, but basically approximating those two basic groups. Now you might say, that's all pretty obvious, because we see around us all the time the benefits and the problems associated with science. But science isn't the only way people look for truths. Some people look for truth in their sacred books or rely on leaders to tell them what is true and false, even what is right and wrong. And this is called revealed truth. And unlike science, revealed truth is held to be absolutely true, so that new discoveries don't change it, and it changes very little as time goes by. And whereas with science, it's the constant challenging and questioning that are essential, with revealed truth, criticism isn't always welcome. And there's another form of revealed truth, personal revelation, that many people with religious faith rely on. Now, humanists, we also get these feelings that come to us unexpectedly, unbidden, but we believe they come from in here, from ourselves, rather than some source of ultimate truth out there. Now, revealed truth and discovered truth are often at odds, and there are many examples. Long ago, before we had the scientific method, most people believed in creation myths. And this is myths about how everything started. They believed because they read it in a book or because somebody had told them. But now we have a choice. We can believe the creation stories, or we can believe what science has shown us about the universe, about evolution, about the standard model of physics and new synthesis biology. That's to say, discovered truth rather than revealed truth. Now, there's a horrifying statistic that 40% of the population of the United States are young Earth creationists. They believe the Earth and man, the universe, was created about 10,000 years ago, much as it is now. And the Big Bang and ancient geology and evolution are just theories. So it's perhaps not surprising that these people also believe that a billionaire property developer with a personality disorder would make a good president. But science isn't just about the physical world. Nothing is off limits in our search for the truth. How our minds and our brains work, but is studied by psychology and neuroscience. And also our personality, our morality, our consciousness, and even our sense of spirituality and religiosity can be studied. Of course, science doesn't have but each year we know more and the gaps in our knowledge are filled in. And when scientists come across something unexpected they don't understand, they say, this is interesting, let's work on this, let's try and work out the answer, which is a lot better than saying, well, it's a mystery, and then making up stories to explain the gaps in our knowledge. When science explains something that was previously mysterious, then the religious explanations move into the gaps that we're still working on. That's the so-called God of the gaps. Karl Popper basically said that rationalism is an attitude of humility and cooperation to get nearer the truth. William Clifford, the Victorian philosopher and mathematician, wrote, "It is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence." Now this is in strong contrast with some religions that actually value faith in the absence of evidence. For example, Tertullian, a rather long time ago, said, "Credo quia impossibile," I believe it because it is impossible. Those are my exclamation marks. They don't have much punctuation in Latin. Humanists say that belief against the evidence, which is what we call blind faith, isn't a virtue at all. We see it as a vice. Now my next quotation comes from this guy. Who is it? Lewis Carroll, yeah. Okay, so before I tell you the quote, let me ask you this. Supposing somebody sincerely believed that the world was flat, and if you walk far enough you'll fall off the edge. Why? Why would they believe that? There aren't all that many reasons. Okay, firstly, they may not know the evidence. There was a time when everybody thought the world was flat. Okay, or they're not clever enough to understand the evidence, or they're actually deluded, a psychiatric disorder, madness, or maybe they've been tricked. I have seen a woman sawn in half on a stage. I have seen, with my own eyes, miracles performed on stage. Derren Brown's current London show is called Miracles. It's mind-blowing. Or, okay, they're neither ignorant, stupid, mad, or naive. They're normal people, just like you and me. Well, I'm normal, I don't know about you. They're normal people who are trying very, very hard to believe something that isn't true, and they're succeeding. If you try hard enough, you can believe anything. And often blind faith with the least evidence has to be the strongest. Blind faith is both strong and personal, so that if it's criticized or even questioned, it seems like a personal attack. Which leads me to my quotation. So Alice says to the White Queen she can't believe impossible things, and the White Queen replies, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always practiced for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Now that's really trying hard. Father Tertullian would have been proud of the White Queen. Now, also under humanist values, we've got social attitudes. I'm going to go through this very, very briefly. In recognition of the value of the individual, we are very committed to human rights. We work at national, European, and international levels for human rights, not just for humanists, but for all, including promoting religious freedom. We work closely with a number of organisations to make the world a better place. Some secular organisations, some, like the Jubilee Debt Campaign, were set up by religious coalitions, which we as humanists have joined. And we support humanists by providing for them many of the benefits of religion that they miss out on. And there are many psychological and social benefits of religion. For example, we train celebrants to lead humanist baby namings, weddings, and funerals. I do funerals. Who's been to a humanist funeral? Raise your hand. Probably a third to a half. Okay. And we also now train humanists to undertake pastoral work, the equivalent of chaplains, if you like, in prisons and hospitals and universities and in the armed forces. I'm just going to say a little bit about secularism. Now, humanists believe that given the huge variety of belief systems in the world and in this country as well, it's important that our government and its various institutions should be neutral, without privileges for Christians or humanists or any group. We seek a secular state, okay? Not in the sense of being atheist, but in the sense of being neutral, providing a level playing field for everyone. We do not seek a secular society. That's a society without religion. Humanists are entirely accepting of the rights of others to hold other opinions and to lead their lives as they wish, as long as they don't harm themselves or other people. State secularism does not, as some people fear, mean discrimination against religion. State secularism just means that all are treated the same, without additional reference, deference given to religious views. And decision makers should not give any credence to arguments that are purely religious. Too often in the past, and still to some extent, religions have sought to impose their beliefs on others willy-nilly, which is in essence a totalitarian system. In a liberal and open society, humanists seek only to impose freedom, and state secularism is in fact the best guarantee, not just from interference by religion, but also the best guarantee for freedom of religion. Okay, there we go. Right. So, one of the common but ill-informed criticisms of humanism is that it's bland and dull and lacks any sense of transcendence that is such a big part of religious ritual and religious experience, spirituality. So what do we mean by this spiritual experience? Well, we all get these wonderful feelings. I get it when I walk into a wonderful cathedral or a majestic Islamic building such as the Taj Mahal or the Alhambra here. And I get it with many varieties of religious art and music. For these move all of us, regardless of our faith or lack of it. What one feels at these times is not just more intense than expected, but of a different kind. There's a feeling of transcendence, a feeling of awe and wonder. So let me explain. When I look at a beautiful object, I feel good. The more beautiful, the better I feel. But sometimes a thing of beauty, like this, affects me so that I sense something profound, not just for that beautiful sculpture, but for the world about me and my own small place in the world. This is common with great religious art, which is after all designed to give you a tingle factor, but also occurs with secular art and with nature. I can remember a rainbow on a mellow autumn afternoon that so moved me that I felt in my heart that it is just wonderful to be alive. These spiritual experiences seem rather otherworldly, but they're not. They're in here. And this is the brain, and the spiritual experiences come from the temporal lobes, which is the green part. Now, there's a vast amount of research about transcendental experiences, starting with phenomenological studies, for example, William James or our own Alistair Hardy at Lampeter, and more recently, functional MRI scans and in-depth brain stimulation experiments. And psychologists have shown that spirituality and religiosity is a human characteristic that varies from person to person. And there's an all distribution. Most people are in the middle. Some people are intensely spiritual, and some people at the bottom end are very skeptical and not susceptible to religion. Now, what accounts for this variation in spirituality and religiosity in the community? There can only be two things: our genes and our environment, or a combination of the two. Now, about 40% of the variation in religiosity is determined by our genes. And this has been shown by a number of well-conducted research experiments in different cultures and different countries based on concordance among twin studies. That means there's still 50% affected by our upbringing and our adult experiences. And I can talk more about this later if you like, But this tends to account quite well for the mathematical steady decline in religiosity in the community. If both your parents are religious, you have a 50% chance of being religious. If one is, you have a 25% chance, and if neither parent is religious, you have only about a 34% chance of being religious once you've left home in your adult life. I wish you had more time to discuss this. But, you know, at the end of the day, does it really matter that you don't have to be religious to experience these wonderful transcendental feelings? Does it matter that a beautiful rainbow can be explained by the refraction of light? Does it matter that neuroscientists have shown that many of our feelings, including appreciation of great art, pleasure and love, and ecstasy and tingle factors, are the result of electrochemical changes in the brain? Does it matter that spiritual experiences may be mediated by oxytocin? Does it matter that awe and wonder, the transcendental experience, is in here, not out there? Does it matter that to some degree my spiritual experiences are part of my genes, not just my upbringing? None of these matter in the least. None of these diminish my sense of joy and wonder when I experience a transcendental feeling. For it is part of what it is to be human, as is our consciousness, our free will, our innate moral sense, and our compassion for others. Some people experience these moments of wonder more easily than others. Some train their minds to feel transcendence by contemplation, meditation, or prayer. But a sense of wonder about the world and the awe we feel when in the presence of great art and the majesty of nature, these experiences are available to all of us, regardless of our faith or lack of it. So when you are next watching a sunset or enjoying great art or are close to someone you love, let the experience take over. Open your mind to wonder and awe and oxytocin. For what goes on in here is the greatest show on earth, and it's free. Okay, now we're coming to the final stretch. This is the big question. How do humanists answer what is the meaning of life? This is an area of philosophy called metaphysics. Now, I'm not going to spend long on this, but it's a really fascinating and important subject. For example, we could consider the question might not in fact be answerable due to an insuperable category error. So, let me give you an example. If I asked you, why is half a duck? You can't answer that, it doesn't make sense, it's not grammatical. What is the meaning of life is grammatical. Okay, that's the first hurdle. But the problem is, if I said to you, why does the colour green sleep badly? You'd say, well, hang on, there's a set of things that sleep and a set of things that don't sleep, and the colour green doesn't sleep, so you can't answer the question. And it may well be there are certain things that have meaning, and life isn't one of them, so it's not answerable. But you know, that's a bit of a cop-out, because we all sort of feel. So you could deconstruct it, you could say, what do you mean by life? And in what sense are we using meaning? You could avoid saying, what is the meaning of meaning? Very interesting, you can come back to that at the end if you want to. But you know, let me give you my personal take on the meaning of life. A take that I think is shared by many humanists. Sometimes when I meet with a family to discuss the humanist funeral service for a member of their family, they have difficulty in describing the person they knew so well. They say, well, he had a shop, and then after a time he played a lot of tennis. But of course, what I want to know is what he was really like. What was important to him? What was significant to him? What in his life had meaning and value? And maybe that's the important big question. Not what is the meaning of life, but what is the meaning of a life, an individual's life, such as the life of the person whose funeral I'm doing, or my life, or your life. It makes me think of an old film, almost old as I am, called It's a Wonderful Life. Who's seen this? Yeah, a few of you have seen it, okay. You remember it starts with James Stewart playing the part of a man standing on a bridge contemplating suicide because he thinks his life is without meaning and value, and his family, his world will be better off if he jumped. Well, he doesn't. Because in the film, a trainee guardian angel called Clarence, talks to him and shows him his life in a series of flashbacks, and also visions of what his life would have been like had he not existed. And the angel persuades him that his life, an ordinary, unexceptional, small-town, mid-American life, was a good life, a life he lived well, a life that touched and influenced for the better so many others. It's an uplifting film because it says something important to all of us. Sure, what you do is important, but it's the way you lead your life that gives it meaning and value. Now, one film inevitably leads to another. At the end of this wonderfully silly film, okay, the presenter is handed a book and says, well, that's the end of the film, now here's the meaning of life, which she opens and says, well, it's nothing very much. Try and be nice to people, avoid eating fat, read a good book now and then, get some walking in, and try and live together in peace and harmony with people of all creeds and nations. Well, it may not be quite as simple as that, but I think the movie's message is a deflationary message. And it may not be far off the mark, because basically it's saying that life's meaning can be understood by anybody. You don't need to be a philosopher or a priest to understand the meaning of life. And the conclusion that most humanists reach is that in the absence of an ultimate purpose to the universe, this concept, the meaning of life, is a human construct that exists in our minds and is not out there waiting for us to discover it. That's to say, from a philosophical viewpoint, we're non-realists. So when, for whatever reason, maybe you're approaching death, you ask yourself, what's it all about? You could look around and see for yourself the many ways your life could be meaningful. You can see the value in happiness without believing it's everything, because there'll be times when happiness may be hard to find. You can appreciate the pleasures of life without becoming a slave to your desires. You can see the value of success, but understand that it's striving to achieve that may be more important than fame. You can appreciate the value in helping others to also lead meaningful lives without fear that others will demand more from you than you can give. And finally, you can recognize that it's love that moves us to lead lives of meaning and value. Love and respect for the fragile world we live in. Love and compassion for our fellow men and women. In this talk, I've tried to give you a thumbnail sketch of what humanism is, and I hope you understand why it's important, because it affects over half the population, and soon an even bigger proportion. But in particular, I wanted to dispel some myths about humanism. Firstly, that there aren't many of us around. In fact, it is very common. The myth that humanists are against religion. On the contrary, we fight for religious peoples, for their freedom and their rights. That state secularism, which we're very keen on, does not mean we want a secular society. It is not against religion. In fact, it is the best thing for religion. The myth that humanists have no morals, on the contrary, I've shown that's not the case. That we're dull, we have no sense of the spiritual. I hope I've dispelled that myth. And that our lives have no meaning. Now, if you want to know more about humanism, there's the British Human Association. There's a good website, just Google BHA. We have a local group. We have a website. We have Twitter, whatever that is. And Facebook. And we have regular meetings on a Thursday. Just around the corner at the University Centre. And for example, we have talks from sometimes humanists, sometimes religion. We had an imam recently. We've had a secular Quaker. We've got a Unitarian coming to talk to us. We had somebody from the Howard League of Penal Reform who were interested in social issues. We even had a talk from a representative of the English Collective of Prostitutes about possible changes in the law. A very interesting talk. And the next talk is on the 20th, and it's Professor Ralph from Harper Adams, and it is a fascinating talk about where our food comes from, where it should come from, and it involves a number of interesting problems for the future, including ethical problems. Thank you. Absolutely, yes.
Can I kick off?
Absolutely.
The icon for humanism. Would you like to just tell us about that? This man.
Yeah, that's the happy humanist. Way. And yeah,
Right, that's happy.
we set great store on happiness. Now that might seem a little trivial, but actually, if you think about it, happiness is the one thing we want for itself. We want money, but we want money to buy things. We want houses to live in, but happiness is the one thing. What do you want for your kids? You want to be happy. So what we want is people in the world to be happy, which means fulfilled. We're talking about happiness in a sort of eudaimonia Aristotelian sense, the good life, leading the good life. And that's what we feel everybody should do, and we should help everyone to do, particularly as we just have the one life.
Up at the back there. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I sense a kind of a sudden shift when you started to talk about spiritual experiences. When we have that experience, this is why we have created a transcendent realm. We needed to explain where it comes from. But I'm wondering if there's any proof that that's created in the brain or received by the brain, because a lot of our concept of beauty and love is so large, it's larger than us. So we try and explain it by that being a spiritual realm. And okay, we've turned it into a man with a long white beard on a throne. But what we're actually experiencing is a reality, and it's the reality that binds us all. But a spiritualist would say that's our spirit joining with other spirits. For me, it's our emotion being conscious of all the beautiful emotion in the world, which we're part of. So we're part of a greater thing.
That's a really, really good and important question. And it is the subject of a whole talk on its own. Okay, so it would be very interesting if somebody could show that some force outside is remotely affecting our experiences. And of course that means affecting our brain, because all our experiences are due to brain function. In fact, the evidence would suggest that spiritual experiences are a feature of brain function. We see disturbed brain function, for example, epilepsy presenting with religious experience. You can stimulate the brain, you get religious experiences. Certain chemicals will induce religious experiences in people. So it sounds as though it's a sort of, at one level it is a brain function, although maybe Martians have been and things into our heads. I can't disprove that. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? What's the approach with humanism in relation to euthanasia?
Okay, this is a very interesting question. And one of the things which I like about humanists is we're not all exactly the same. We don't have one hymn book we all have to follow. And we disagree, usually in a matter of degrees. Some of the main objections to assisted dying of the kind recommended by Lord Falconer, which would make it the most rigorously controlled of any in the world, are religious. And they are purely religious, based on the sanctity of life. And I think we object to that. Now, I'm a doctor, and I have reservations about a change in the law, mainly because at the moment we're developing wonderful palliative care services. And I don't want anything that will undermine that. I don't want people to get the impression that all deaths are going to be awful, so you best leave early. In fact, there are very few people at all, probably a handful of people each year that would actually request assisted dying. I mean, I'm a neurologist and I work with people with motor neuron disease. And I say to them, well, they say to me, Doc, what about this Dignitas place when things get bad? So I said, well, you can go to Dignitas if you like. They will kill you, that's what they do. They will kill anybody. You don't have to be terminal. You can be, a third of people they kill are just tired of life. That's what Dignitas does, they kill people. I said, in fact, we could do something a little bit more subtle, but it means you and I have got to work closely together. So at the moment, you're keen to keep going and to be as active as you can for what time you have, but if at some stage the going gets tough and you really feel your quality of life is poor, then I will make sure you don't suffer. I will give you whatever it takes to make sure you don't suffer. That may shorten your life, it may not, but even if it does shorten your life, that is absolutely fine ethically, morally and legally. It's called the double effect doctrine. You can give somebody morphine in the terminal stages of their life. It may suppress their breathing, that may lead to a slightly early death, but you're not giving it to kill them, you're giving them to relieve suffering. So I explain this to the patient. They say, oh, well, that's great. I don't need to go to Dignitas. And oddly enough, I see them a year later, and they're gasping for breath, and I think, gosh, I wonder whether this is the time when they might be asking me. But no, they're very keen to keep going. Their cousin's coming over from Australia in a couple of weeks, and they want to see them, and their daughter's doing their A-levels, and they keep going. But one of the reasons they keep going is they know that they have a compassionate neurologist or hospice person who's going to make sure that at the end they don't suffer. So if you look at it from that point of view, you realise why some of the medical profession are less keen on it. But the main reason we need to change the law is the present law is very bad. The present law, in fact, allows people to bump off their granny with impunity, and it needs changing.
I have a question about families where there are some who have a very strong religious faith and a family member who is a humanist. When it comes to the funeral of that family life, which is...
Okay, so for those who didn't hear, supposing you have a family where some members are religious and some are humanist, and when a member of that family dies, what happens? Well, it is of course helpful if people say before they die what they would like for their funeral. And on the whole, we respect the wishes that they expressed. I'm quite relaxed. I'll give you an example. I don't incorporate any religion in the funeral services, but I make sure that people of religious faith are welcomed. And I explain that the deceased, although they lived without religion, they respected those with faith. And he would have welcomed their silent prayers later on while we're sitting quietly and thinking about his life. So they feel welcomed. And often after my funeral services outside, people of faith have come and said they very much enjoyed the service and they didn't feel left out. So I think it's very important that you don't antagonize people or make them feel left out of a very important occasion. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I know family experience in that a widow was so bereft because there was none of what she believed in her husband's wishes.
Okay, so I'll just say that it's a very sad case where the widow was upset because she was religious and all the things comforting were there. And a Christian funeral is very, very comforting. The tragedy of the death is offset to some extent by knowing that it's part of God's will. And also it's softened by knowing they've gone to a better place forever, for eternity, which is a very long time, particularly towards the end. And they've gone to join people who have died previously. These are very, very comforting ideas. But of course, if you don't believe them, then they come across as very sincere. So we do humanist funerals that are spiritual and meaningful and about the person and their place in the family and in the world, but without those religious features.
You sometimes wish that the humanists had a right or two of good, rollicking, rousing hymns.
Well, we do actually. We've written some. We've written songs to Ode of Joy. We occasionally sing hymns, but if we have the word God in it, we change it to Bob.
That was intensely rational and really very little to argue with there, I think. I mentioned the
Marie de Pascal, who was a French mathematician, who said there's really just two wages. You can go along and not believe, you get to heaven, and there is a God, well, you is it then. But if you go along with the believing and then get to heaven, there isn't a God, there's not really much punishment involved, is there?
I think God would see through that one, actually. He's not stupid, or she's not stupid.
But your rationale is excellent
Thank you.
and very good to all of you. Thank you very much for your time.